recording.
Oop, take two.
Hi, Nick. Hi, problem solvers. How are you today?
Hi, I'm doing great. How are you, Devin?
I am doing pretty well. Um, hello and welcome to our Solve It team who's watching this video. Today, Nick and I are going to talk about how to build a virtual team and collaborate to solve a problem online. Nick, do you want to tell the viewers a little bit more about you?
Yeah, I work for Technovation, but I am based all the way in the Bay Area in California, and Devin's all the way in New York. So we virtually work online all the time.
That's right. Nick and I are on an online team. We virtually collaborate. So we thought today we would share with you some of our tips for how to accomplish big goals together. I'll share some of my favorite tools. Nick is going to share some tips about how to code and create a prototype when you are collaborating online. And yeah, we thought we would just have a fun little conversation. So Nick, I guess our Solve It team members have been thinking about what problems are important to them, and they've been hearing from some of our community members about what problems they've solved. But it occurs to me that once they have an idea, they might need to find some people to help them build their idea and solve their problem together. Do you have any tips for them if they want to find a team?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is just getting the word out there. Because we learned in the last video, we spent a lot of time thinking about what's important to us and what matters to us. And if these things are that important to us, I think that's really infectious, right? Getting the word out there, letting people know that you have this great idea will inspire others to join your cause.
That's a great point. And maybe if you have a school or classes that have gone online, maybe there are people who are looking for like kind of an after school club style where you guys can work together online after school hours to build this problem and learn something together. Like one thing that occurs to me is that it might be a little challenging or tricky to find people to work online as a team with you. Do you have any tips or any thoughts on just the process of finding people to work together with?
Yeah, like I think reach out to your friend group. They're your friends, right? You guys have similar interests. And even if you don't, I think getting them on board for a bit and working with them really starts to build interest because of the time they invested. They start seeing the big idea, start seeing that, hey, this is something that is really interesting and something I want to work on. Another thing is a lot of schools are taking their classes online now. So meet up with your school online, start a chat group, start a social media group. I think those are all great places to start looking.
And I think even if you talk to one or two or three people who aren't interested, like you said earlier, Nick, if you're really excited about your idea and if you're able to share why it's important, you'll eventually find people. Maybe it's your friends, maybe it's new people that are interested in working and learning together with you. So we encourage you to be creative and don't give up on trying to find people to collaborate with you. So once you have your online team, um, it will make sense for you to think about ways to collaborate together, what tools you want to use, and how you want to set goals to get things done. So now I'm going to share a little bit about some of the tools that we use at Technovation to collaborate as an online team, and you can explore them as a starting point and think through if they make sense for your team to use. So the first thing is that you are going to want to figure out how you're going to communicate. We've found at Technovation that video meetings really help because you can see each other, you can watch people's expressions, and you can really quickly talk any misunderstandings or any things that are unclear out. So we recommend that you research different video meeting formats. There's a lot of different kinds. It'll depend on where you're located and what's best for you. So that's our first tip is put some video meetings into place and find a great tool to use. The next thing that I would recommend if you're working as an online team is to find tools that you can use to work together. At Technovation, we use Google Suite because you can see the work that people are doing. You can see any changes that are made immediately. So I think that could be a great tool, but there are others as well that you can immediately see what people are working on and the changes that they make. Another tool that we use a lot for sharing like video files, because they can be really big, is Dropbox. So, if you're working on a video to share your ideas, that could be a great tool to share the files back and forth, because it can get a little tricky if you're emailing or trying to upload them to the Google Drive. And then finally, I recommend kind of recording your notes. So these online meetings are great, but you always need to record the different conversations you have or what people are doing. And Nick, I think I added a notes example to just show everyone today.
Yeah, you did. These are an example of our wonderful notes.
Awesome. So you can see, you can make your notes however you want. You can use Google Documents so everyone can see your notes. But we like to talk about our goals of the meetings. We like to give updates, and we like to talk about our to-dos or things that need to happen. So this could be great if you're working on a team to solve a problem. You can give your updates about how solving the problem is going, and you can make to-dos for what needs to happen next to solve your problem or make your online prototype.
Yeah, and I think another great thing is like I can look back on our notes too, because I forget all the time and Devin has to remind me, right? But if I have notes like this, I can always go back and remind myself, oh, this is what happened last week.
That's a great point, Nick. Or if you have people who miss your online meetings, because we all have busy schedules, they can always check out the notes that you take. All right, so the next thing that we always struggle with is finding times to meet up as a team. So you can use a poll to ask people when they are free to meet up. That's always useful, so you don't have to send a million different emails or text messages trying to understand when people can talk with you. And the next part is setting goals. So breaking your goals down into smaller pieces, which watching this series will help with. We are trying to break down how to solve a big problem into different videos. But if you want to make a technology prototype, or if you want to solve a problem in your community, there's a lot of different steps that add up to that. So trying to break those goals down into smaller, actionable items and making a to-do list. And Nick, I think I have an example of a to-do list as well.
That you do. You are such an organized person.
So you can see here, you can make to-do lists how you want, but it's helpful on to-do lists to understand what the action is and who's in charge of it. I would also suggest having a date for when you want those things to be done. And then when you have your meetings, you can talk about how all of your to-dos are going, and you can reference your list, and you can make a plan for what you want to do in the future. And then this is my last big recommendation. So any online teams need to know how to communicate with each other. Sometimes you'll get frustrated with each other. That's okay. It's always expected that people communicate and do work differently. So I would recommend, if you're building an online team that is wanting to solve a problem, that you just make a plan for how you want to communicate with each other. What will you do when you're frustrated? Will you have a system or a code word, or maybe you'll take a break? How will you communicate when you're not on calls? Will you use email? Will you use text messages? Whatever works for the people on your team to just keep the information flowing. And then another thing I would recommend talking about is understanding what your deadlines are, but also understanding what happens if something is missed. It's not the end of the world if you don't get all of your to-dos done perfectly. What is the most important is that your team is working together and you're aligned on where you want to go. So I just think it's great to have this conversation up front, Nick.
Yeah, for sure. Like due dates are helpful so that we are moving along, right? But it's also helpful because I know what you're trying to work on. And if you miss it, you miss it. Like we can always work together to find a way to get around it.
Absolutely. And then finally, I think a fun thing to do at the beginning of any meeting, but especially when you first start working together, is do some icebreakers just to build trust and have fun with each other. Solving problems are fun, but it's also fun to just kind of get to know people and talk with them and hear their views on things. We actually have a great resource of different icebreakers. We will link it below this video, and Nick is going to share it with you right now. So there are a lot of different items or different things and games you can play with each other. One of the ones that I think could be fun for an online meeting is number 9. So this one is where you find a picture and then that describes you, and then tell your team why you think that picture represents you. So you guys could do like a Google image search and each share a picture and why that picture it describes maybe your mood or how you like to work together or anything else about you. So we'll link that. You can choose the ones that you think sound fun, but I think that could be a cool one for online. Did you have any, Nick, that you thought could be fun?
I've always loved playing rock, paper, scissors.
Yes, you can play an online game of rock, paper, scissors. Now that I have shared some of our tools, you can do your own research. Of course, those are just some beginning tools and different things that I would do if I was working on an online team. Nick is going to share with us how you can code together. So once you have your tools and once you have your team, you're going to want to start building your project. So he has some great ideas for that. Nick, what do you want to share with us today?
So the first thing I want to share is something called pair programming. It's something that Technovation highly recommends. It's basically the process where you share your screen and one person acts as the pilot or the driver of the code, and they're the person who's actively writing code. The other person is the navigator, and this person is looking over the shoulder, reviewing, and constantly providing like thoughts and feedbacks on the coding process. And this whole idea is based on that two heads are better than one, right? Like everyone is good at different things, everyone has different perspectives. So if you're both looking at the same screen, all your talents are going to come together and come out in an even greater and better way than as opposed to you two working individually. You can kind of adapt this idea to however many people your team has. It doesn't only have to be two. But I think the more important part is that this role of navigator and driver rotates constantly. So you don't always have the same person writing code. You don't always have the same person providing feedback. It's like everyone should get their chance to bring out their ideas and see how their code ends up forming based on who's coding it. Another thing that is really important, since we are working virtually, is really important to be able to share your code, right? So unlike Google Docs, in Thunkable and App Inventor, things don't update simultaneously. They don't update live. So if I was to make a change and then Devin was to open the project, it won't be there. So an important thing to do is to be able to share your project. So in Thunkable, we have an example over here. Up here, it's a nice little share button. And what happens when you click it is that it will say you can generate a link. Now this link is basically a copy of your project, a save file of your project. You can save this link and share it with your teammates so that everyone has their own updated version of the app. App Inventor is really similar. This is what the App Inventor screen looks like. So up here, if you click My Projects, you're going to have to click Export Selected Project to AI to my computer. So what this does is create a save file of your project that is openable in App Inventor for the rest of your teammates. So you're going to click this file, download it, share with your teammates.
Once you share it with your team, and if they make changes, how would they share it? Would they do the same thing to share it back, or how would that work?
Yeah, so it's important to know whatever file you send to your teams is obviously not going to be the same file on your own computer anymore. Things are going to change, things are going to get updated. So there's going to be a constant sharing back and forth of the most updated version of your app. But that can get really confusing, right? Like, what is this file? Did you send me that?
Definitely get confusing.
So we have some tips for that too. We recommend you use something called change logs and version numbering. So a change log is basically a record, a document of everything I do to change the code whenever I work on it. So that way, let's say yesterday I changed the screen and Devin opens the project and she's like, what's going on? She can go back to our change log and see that, oh, Nick put the notes here that he did X, Y, and Z. And now I understand why our code looks different from 2 days ago.
That's cool. So you could maybe put a change log as part of your meeting notes that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, it's definitely a great addition to your meeting notes. Another thing that we recommend is called version numbering. So version numbering is a numbering or naming convention for your save file so that you can keep on top of which one is actually the most updated. So here's the example of a change log. You see that I've done all these things and I've put it down on this document so that my team very easily understands that what has changed with my code, with our code recently. And up here is an example of a version number. So that might be a little confusing, so we can break it down a bit. So version numbering is a little arbitrary, but it is helpful, right? So going from left to right, the number denotes levels of change. The general rule is that the leftmost number, the bigger that is, the more updated your version is. So 1.0.1 is newer than 0.4.3, even though the 4s and 3s are bigger in the later places.
Nick, when I'm coding, do I always want to be coding on the most updated version?
Oh yeah, for sure. Because you want to make sure all your teammates' changes are in place, right? Like if someone does something completely different and they're working on an old version and everyone else is working on the new version, then all that work has to be replicated back onto the most updated version. So keep your naming conventions, keep your save files up to date so that everyone knows what's what, and work on the most updated version of your app. Another quick rule is that generally that leftmost number in your version number, until you've released a full first functional version of your app, that number is generally 0. So version 1.0 will be the first fully completed version of your app. And this number can go past 1, it can be like 2.0, right? The most, an even newer version. And again, these are just general rules. Just do something that everyone on your team understands and is consistent. And finally, our last couple of tips: make multiple save files in case something goes horribly wrong, you can't figure it out, code's not working anymore. You can roll back to an earlier version where things are still working and hopefully avoid completely losing your app.
And Nick, is it normal? Does it usually happen that people will have a few times where the code gets messed up and they need to go back to a newer version?
Oh, all the time. It's not even that your code doesn't work anymore. It's more like you've changed you've changed your mind and you don't really like the direction this code is going, right? Maybe you've decided this screen is no longer useful, but it can get confusing to take out all these integrated parts. So you roll back to an earlier version before all these things you no longer want were there, and then you basically have a fresh plate to start off of.
So that means your change logs are really important, so you can tell what version you want to go back to.
Exactly, you've got it. Change logs and version numbers, knowing what's what for everyone on the team, super important. So yeah, definitely use these ideas, especially when you're naming your files, when you share those links, like save them in a document. When you share your save files, change the file names with these naming conventions so that everyone knows what's what. And yeah, that's all the tips I have. I hope they're helpful for you guys.
So yeah, those are our tips for building online teams, working together, and then coding online. Our top tips for keeping it all straight. Nick, what do we have coming up on the next videos in our series?
That's going to be a surprise. You're going to have to check in on this channel every Tuesdays and Thursdays for our next video series. And as usual, all our resources are going to be linked down below, so check them out. They're going to be really helpful for you. And otherwise, we'll catch you next time, Solve It team.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.